deň. Chcel by som vás privítať mene organizačného výboru interdisciplinárnych dialogov na ďalšej časti cyklu. Máme tu možnosť dnes počuť prednášku od doktora Valerijsa Vinogradova. Názov ste si všimli, obsahuje zvláštne slovo, je Parrhesia. Kolega pôsobil na zahraničných univerzitách, myslím naposledy v Melbourne School of Continental Thought. A už len krátko k tej téme, neviem, či si niekto všimol, pozrel, je to stará kultúrna téma, ktorá spáva vlastne úplne počiatky našej západnej, filozoficky založenej politickej kultúry. A zaujímavé je, že teda nie je to archaická téma. Parrhesia znamená teda odvážna reč, vôbec kapacita, schopnosť odvážnej reči, priamej reči, otvorenej reči, ktorá vždy určitým spôsobom súvisí s pravdou. To, s čím sa konfrontuje otázka, v každom prípade nesie to svoj riziko, ktoré dopadá ani nie tak ani na komunitu, ako skôr na toho, kto sa takéto reči podujme. Takže to je téma, ktorá znovu bola aktualizovaná potom mnohokrát. Myslím, že príkladov bude asi dosť, ktoré uvedie a naposledy konec koncov aj Michelom Foucaultom v 20. storočí, ktorý z tejto témy odvodzuje nie archaický, ale vysoce moderný problém, a to je problém kriticky založenej filozofie, kriticky založeného myslenia. Tak aby som dal slovo už kolegovi.
So, very happy to be here in Slovakia for one semester. Special thanks to Martin Bozorat for hosting me and bringing me all the way from Tasmania, believe it or not. So, last couple of years, I suppose, have been tough for everyone in Europe or Australia, US, doesn't matter. They've been really tough for me as well, and what has keeping me going is something like this project. So here we have a big project. It's like a special issue of a philosophy journal called Parrhesia. It's based in Melbourne. It's open access. I only work with open access journals. So the difference is that there's some, imperial corporations, conglomerates that ask you for money and take your copyright from you. And there's open access journals which are freely available to anyone. And so this is my political stance. I only work with journals that are for the people rather than for corporations. So you can call me any way you like it. I have so many names. You can come up with any name you like. You can call me D7 for today. Sounds good enough. So today we are talking about Parrhesia. In short, today's lecture structure is something like this. I'm going to take you through the main points found in Michel Foucault's last lectures that he gave in Berkeley in California in 1983. So they were called Courage of Truth, or Discourse of Truth, or Fearless Speech, Courage of Truth. There's many translations. He gave these lectures just before his death in 1984. He died from AIDS, unfortunately, and it's a real shame because he was possibly one of the last great thinkers we've had in 20th, 21st century. And his concern in this lecture series is not the truth, so it's not as such epistemological, though he talks about, the conditions for being able to speak the truth. His real concern is a person who speaks the truth. So what are the conditions for one to be able or to be in a position to speak the truth? So he puts it much better than I do. My intention is in this lecture series was not to deal with the problem of truth, but with the problem of the truth teller and of truth telling as an activity. Who is able to tell the truth? About what? with what consequences, and with what relations to power. So if you're familiar with Foucault, this idea of power or authority cuts through all of his works, whether it's his work on madness or his work on prisons and so on and so on. And he's really interested in trying to kind of cut through the hypocrisy and lies that we're all subjected to in the everyday. Like, for example, are people who we consider mad are actually mad, or maybe we're just normal, or do people deserve to be imprisoned for, petty things, the issue of policing and so on and so on. So he's a social philosopher in the greatest sense of this word. And if you're not familiar with him, you should be. I've been finding him to be very inspiring for many, many years. And so about in 2022, so it was a couple of years into the COVID, as I pointed out, really difficult years in many ways. I get many ideas for book projects and so on, and I got the idea, Parrhesia, Courage of Truth, sounds philosophical, but at the same time I have quite a few friends who are journalists. Specifically, a very good friend of mine, his name is Mahmoud Fazal, also look him up. He used to work for Vice, for ABC, and he reads philosophy and he likes Foucault as well. But I was like, but why there's no hybrid philosophy with journalism? Why we have separate, disjointed departments within university? We have philosophy department and journalism department. You can kind of try to do unit subjects in both of them, but we don't really have philosophical journalism or journalistic philosophy. And so this project is really framing, this hybrid activity, philosophical journalism, in light of Foucault's idea of fearless speech, which he brings to our attention. He looks at classical sources, so he looks into the antiquity, Greco-Roman antiquity, and he tries to resurrect, if you like. So how would it feel now to be able to have courage of truth? And it's very important here to make a distinction right away between fearless speech and free speech. So, Foucault is a very radical philosopher. He always pushes us to the limits. We have many societies where we have free speech. We also have societies which have no free speech whatsoever. So how would fearless speech or fearless speakers, Parrhesiastes, how would they feel and what would they do in those societies? And so this special volume kind of revolves around these issues, and I'm going to take you through a couple of key contributions. I don't have the time to talk about all of them, and what is more, I don't think people are here prepared to discuss some of the contributions that are out there. I will try to kind of massage and sense whether you're ready for that, and we'll see how that goes. Right, so key points that Foucault fleshes out in the very beginning of his lecture series are like these building blocks of Parrhesia. So the first one is frankness or honesty. I'm typically having issues with authorities because I always try to be frank or honest, while I always bump into people who are just polite. And so the difference between honesty and politeness is very important. We all these have Kafkaesque, circles of professional, polite people, but hardly any one of them is actually honest and frank. And to be able to speak the truth, one needs to be in a position to be honest with themselves and with the world. So Parrhesia, if we were to kind of break it down into two building blocks, is about being able to say everything, is being able to say the whole thing. So that's very, very important. So are you able to, converse with yourself or with people around you, your family, your friends, and are you actually able to say everything to them about how you feel? Typically, no. Typically, we have barriers, we feel not confident in this situation or other one. And so to be able to have the courage, and the courage is opposite of cowardice. So to be able to master the courage, you need to learn to be honest. So that's the first one. Truth. So second component is truth. Again, I'm not particularly interested talking about like epistemology, what is truth, difference between contextual truth, facts, justified beliefs, and so on. So let's just try to, keep it really minimalist. Foucault makes distinction between two versions of Parrhesia in ancient thought, in literature and philosophy. One is like chattering, when you talk to someone and you kind of say whatever comes to your mind, you're having a glass of wine or beer, so it's just chatter. And Foucault calls it like a pejorative sense or like a negative sense. It has nothing to do with the courage that is at stake. And the second one is Parrhesia in its truest and positive sense, and it's about people who are in a position to speak the truth knowingly, knowing that what they're about to say is actually true rather than just some opinion. I have opinions about this or that, but typically if you have a conversation with a person like, do you believe in God, or do you believe in equal marriages, and so on. And typically people who are very territorial about their beliefs, they actually have no substance, and it's what we call kenodoxia, or empty opinion. So a person who has the courage to speak the truth kind of knows that there is substance what he's about to say, and often our truths are susceptible to change, modification, and so on. It's like a journey. Searches for truth is always a process. All right. One extremely important point, and that's something that is quite sexy, and that's what you need to keep in mind, is risk-taking. So courage of truth comes in a context when you are approaching someone in a superior position to you. So for example, when a student is approaching me as a teacher, in a way I'm in a superior position and he can call me out and he can challenge me, so there's some space for Parrhesia. Or if the university lecturer approaches the rector, for example, and tries to call them out as well. Again, there's some room for Parrhesia. So for example, if I were to, approach my son who is 10 and say, speak truth to him, the hierarchy of relationships here does not really allow for Parrhesia as such. So again, different contexts, people calling out politicians and saying that they are not speaking truth. So again, keep in mind that there's always some risk-taking involved in the act of Parrhesia, right? So, and you can see that the correlation between courage and risk-taking is very important. If you take no risks in your life, whether it is to approach, a boy or a girl that you like, or in any other context, you have no courage. So courage is always some form of self-overcoming, if you like. So in the words of Foucault, Parrhesia is linked to courage in the face of danger. It demands the courage to speak the truth in spite of some danger, right? So here's one example to you of speaking truth in the Slovak context, and again, I'll try to make it for you as relatable as possible. 2 years ago, roughly the same time when I launched this project, there was an exhibition scheduled in Bratislava, led exclusively by feminist thinkers and artists. It was quite sexual, or if you like, pornographic in its content, and it was censored because apparently there's still no sex and openness in Slovakia, like in Soviet Union, essentially. So this is, again, people getting in trouble, right? So there's some dangers involved in, for example, creating a conference at this university or any other university revolving around, again, pornography. What is pornography, for example? And it's very important for Foucault because his last unreleased series of books is called History of Sexuality, right? So again, in our schools, school education, university education, we don't have any sexual education. We don't have any erotic education. And so what are the means for us to become familiar with this kind of culture? It's something like art exhibitions. And as you can see, it was censored, and so people who were trying to communicate boldly, courageously, and these people were females, girls, women, were punished for their courage. And as you're going to see, as I'm going to show you via numerous examples, taking courage or taking risk typically involves getting in some kind of trouble, which speaks volumes about the cultures, societies, and communities in which we live. So if people were ready to hear the truth that I want to say about the openness and beauty of female or male body, for example, that doesn't have any clothing from supermarkets on it, typically, again, you would have to face certain bias, prejudices, and so on. But the question is, if we really want to live in a truthful society and believe in democracy where people actually can rely on one another and trust each other, it's to find those liminal spaces, uncomfortable zones, where people get to think about our lives in different ways. And so, as you can see in Slovakia, and again, I'm just using the local examples so it's more relatable to you, but again, there's examples in any country. Typically, people get in trouble. One thing is just get censored, another thing is being killed. And as you know, in 2018, a Slovak journalist was killed again for trying to expose truth of the hypocrisy and corruption in the politics, right? So it's the same kind of context. So another building block of Parrhesia for Foucault is this idea of criticism. So it is about engaging with different social contexts and being able to, create some form of criticism of the existing order of things. So that's very important, right? So typically, if we, again, imagine this hierarchy, people who exercise Parrhesia, they come from the below, from the underground or for the lowest substratum, even though, again, it's all understood in proportion. For example, a lecturer at the university is superior to, PhD students, but at the same time, they're inferior to the departmental head and so on. So these hierarchies, they're exponential. So criticism comes from the below and towards the powers, and it comes in different contexts: family context, political context, social context, and so on and so on. So I hope it makes sense. And finally, what's really important for Foucault is this idea of duty. Most likely he takes it from Immanuel Kant and deontological tradition in moral theories. But duty is different to a rule. So duty is always above your own concerns. Duty is about something that binds us together. So for example, if you have some information to expose, a local authority in politics, right? You are free not to do that. You have a choice. You either do that or you don't do that. But for Foucault, when he brings this moral dimension into the argument, it is important to realize that it's your duty. Again, if there's a corruption at the university, if there's corruption in the local council, and you are aware of that, the question is it your duty to expose those people or no? And again, do you care more about the consequences for yourself or the consequences for the society in which you live? So again, duty is beyond you. It's more than you, and it's very important. So if we were to summarize Foucault up until this moment, so that's how he defines Parrhesia. Parrhesia is a kind of verbal activity where the speaker has a specific relation to truth through frankness, so through honesty. So again, it's a spiritual exercise. If you don't practice honesty in your life, with your kids, family members, siblings, parents, friends, colleagues at work, there's no way you can practice Parrhesia. If you can't be frank, if you can't be honest, it's a no-goer. Then it's defined by a certain relationship to his or her own life through danger or through taking risks, a certain type of relation to himself or other people through criticism. Again, are you a self-reflective person? Can you reflect on the mistakes that you make? Can you learn from them? Can you become bigger than you are right now? And obviously criticism of others, but again, it starts with yourself, with your own honesty, self-reflection, and self-creation, essentially, if I were to put it in very contemporary terms. And most important, and in the end, a relation to morality through freedom and sense of duty. Right. So, let us move to this special volume. So, as I said, I launched it in 2022. 7 out of 9 submissions to this volume I have solicited, so I've been reaching out to many people as I normally do. And again, it's a very tough topic to deal with in the contemporary context, right? In the contemporary geopolitical context where we have wars, racial capitalism everywhere, and ecological disasters. And for Foucault, the thing is that it's because we're not being truthful to the world and ourselves that we have to deal with these issues. And so not many authors were able to take on a task of this caliber in our age, but we have succeeded. And we're trying to bring together philosophy and journalism. So there's kind of 2 types of essays in this volume. One sort is like a scholarly academic essays that deal with things like post-truth politics and in general issues in journalism and the post-truth landscape via the lens of philosophical inquiry. Other kinds of essays are, to me again, that's something I'm really proud of. They really fill this niche of journalistic philosophy or philosophical journalism. So in terms of methodology, style, techniques, there's a few authors who managed to swing between like a journalistic investigation and abstract philosophical reflection. So this is, to me, like it really fills the niche, and that's what we need more. Because clearly they're kindred works, right? So what philosophers do, they try to ascertain errors and, expose injustices and come to some more clarity and cohesion, whether it's in social life, personal life, political life, cosmological life, whatever. Journalists also engage in investigations which are pursuing social justice, clarity, and so on. So there's many parallels between the 2 approaches, but again, I was really baffled why philosophers don't write journalism typically, and why journalists don't study philosophy and don't write anything philosophical. So it's particularly bizarre because of, for example, journalism and literature are compatible. In the 1970s, we had the movement called New Journalism, and we had people like Hunter S. Thompson, who was doing journalism and mixing it with literature. What is more, philosophy and literature are compatible from the very origin of Western philosophical tradition. Plato didn't write these really thick philosophical treatments as we do these days in academia. He wrote literary dialogues. So it's work of literature and philosophy at the same time. So again, I was really baffled why, all these genres are so compatible and so many beautiful texts in literature are philosophical. Hermann Hesse, Thomas Mann, Dostoevsky. It's all philosophy in literary form. And yet, we don't have this, missing genre, as I call it, philosophical journalism. All right, so now let's take a look at the key findings of this volume and see how we go. So first, again, something that I'm very, very proud of. The opening foundational essay is by John Carvalho from Villanova University, and John Carvalho attended the 1983 Foucault lectures at the University of California in Berkeley. So he was learning from Foucault firsthand, and so I'm very, very happy that he is on board. In short, again, he situates his philosophical arguments in the dominant epistemological context of post-truth politics in which we have found ourselves today. So what do we mean by post-truth? So in words of John, marketed by the deployment of social media to accelerate the speed and expand the range of circulation, post-truth dissimulation advances on the strategy by declaring what is manifestly false to be true and doubling down on those fabrications to smother all claims to the country. You can see it in any context. Donald Trump, Putin, Australian politics, and Slovak politics as well. So here's a quote from your finance minister, Ladislav Kamensky. And again, it's, you know, it's about your life and it's about your future, and it's the society in which you live. So this is your finance minister who is talking about books for some reason. Books, according to our analysis, are mostly purchased by wealthier segments of the population. Therefore, so it's a philosophical argument. So he gives you reason. The reason is that according to our analysis, that we don't really reveal to you, but our statistics show that, you know, typically it's the wealthier populations that buy books, and therefore we can, because, you know, it's for those people, they can pay more. Everyone will be paying more for books. So this is a typical example of post-truth politics, because clearly not only the wealthy people in this society buy books, right? Everyone buys books. You can buy a book for €1 in an old, like a second-hand bookshop. You don't need to spend 20 or 30 euros, right? So this is post-truth. And if you were to call this person out, they would say, but hold on, you know, we have this analysis, and they will just try to put together some sketchy documents saying, yeah, here's a statistical poll, it proves that, but, you know, if you were to do some statistical analysis by yourself, the data will be different, most likely, because it depends, you know, who you ask and so on and so on. So this is post-truth politics in flesh in the Slovak context. So overall, John, and I really love working with him. We've done a couple of projects together. He is one of the kind of the aging older generations of thinkers who still has some fire in him, and, you know, whose blood is still boiling. He's got fire in him. So in his argument, he's focusing on one hand on one of the building blocks of Foucault's arguments in the book and in the lecture series, but on the other hand, he's offering us like a new rendition of the old problem. So for Foucault and for Carvalho, the very building block, the backbone for being able to practice fearless speech in your life is friendship, right? And I always juxtapose friendship with like buddies or colleagues at work. They're very, very different things. So with friends, you have some trust. With friends, you can open up. You can open up your mind and you can open up your heart. Sometimes it can come at the expense of, problematizing the friendship, because not all of our friends are ready to hear criticisms and so on. But this is the sphere. This is a climate, intimate climate, within which Parrhesia at the most foundational level can be exercised. And the most paradigmatic reference here is Socrates and Dialogues of Plato, where Socrates is able to talk in this Parrhesiastic way with his interlocutors, right? So it's very, very, very important. Because if we do not have people with trust in this way, there is no society. Society is made out of building blocks. It's not just some abstract notion. Society is families, friends, random people trying to whip something up, something coherent that works. But if you do not have one single, genuine, hard-earned friendship in your life, right? What kind of society are we talking about? What kind of trust are we talking about? There is no trust. There is no society, right? So this is a very, very fundamental question. And for Foucault and Carvalho, this very important critical process that takes place within friendship is when you stage or when you set up a scene where you challenge one another, when you create opportunities to grow, to evolve, to create together. And that typically involves this back and forth. So what do you believe in? Are you sure? Why did you do this? Why did you do that? And so on and so on and so on. And so obviously, some of you who have partners, intimate partners, husbands, wives, are familiar with this kind of dynamic and how difficult it is. And again, on the question of society, and I believe we have an illusion of society. What's the percentage of marriages that fall apart in Slovakia? I don't know. In Australia, it is 60%. So again, if there's real friendship, it doesn't fall apart. If you create, if you grow together, if you can challenge one another, you can flourish together, and society does the same. In Australia, again, I have come across hardly anyone who is capable of true friendship, of actually being out there for one another. It's typically mates, buddies, you meet up to have a beer or a glass of wine and just to recreate after work, or colleagues. But neither of these categories have to do anything with friendship, at least in my eyes. And so to summarize Carvalho's argument, so his point, again, he's as skeptical pretty much as I am about these matters, and he argues that to be able to experience the climate, the environment in which Parrhesia is possible, friendship aside, we are to stage provocative dialogues and artifacts, and I already used one example of a provocative exhibition in 2022 which was censored. It was provocative, it was about sexuality, but it was Parrhesiastic in that, they had the courage to speak about things that not many of us are. By friends, artists, journalists, comedians is a really interesting sphere. I don't have the time to speak about comedy today, but on the stage, stand-up comedians can allow themselves many things that politicians can't, and they can break through taboos and so on. And Carvalho, that is, considers them as kind of fragile achievements. He doesn't believe in the peace for the whole world, in the global revolution and change. He doesn't even believe in a local change, right? So to me, he's not pessimistic, he's quite realistic, he's quite sober, and he's like, what we're actually capable of are these fragile achievements if we're not censored, if we're not fired, if we're not ostracized, seeping from a life from affordances dishonestly depleted by post-truth politics. And unlike our next contributor, Chris Schwartz, Carvalho doesn't believe in engagement with the mainstream. And that's very important, and that resonates with me as well. He's like, if you really want to do something, something cool, significant, and special, you can't engage with the mainstream official discourse because it will eat you away. It will punish you right away. But in the underground, here and there, half licit, half legal, illegal activities, this is where some of that niche is. And if you like, on Thursday, as one of the fragile achievements, I'll be playing a porno electro set at the local art gallery at 6:30. So that's something, again, the underground. All right, next piece. Christopher Schwartz, when I reached out to him in 2022, he was completing PhD at KU Leuven, which is like a Belgian university. It took him 7 years to complete his PhD, and his PhD deals precisely with the intersections between power, political philosophy, and journalism. To my knowledge, this is the first doctoral dissertation written in that field, so I'm very happy and proud that he's on board. Since then, when I got in touch with him, he was totally broke. Again, it took 7 years. He wasn't getting paid any scholarship, and he was not based in Belgium. He's American, and he wasn't based in America. He was based in Kyrgyzstan because his wife is from there. So his life has turned around, and my life has turned around as well, as you can see. Now he is working at Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, US. So Chris is a wonderful human being, very spiritual, very oriented towards spirituality, and as you're going to see, you know, these personal preferences in his life also play out in the argument. So he argues that let me qualify something. So now we are more moving in a direction of interpretations of Foucault's original ideas. So they are somewhat aligned with Foucault, but at the same time they develop his thoughts in a more contemporary context. So for Chris, for Parrhesia to be effective, it needs to meet two criteria. One is epistemological and one is ethical. Epistemological means that an act of Parrhesia, fearless speech, whether through dialogue or art, whatever, needs to be context sensitive. So that's really, really important. So it's not that I just come on stage or whatever I want and just blabber and take whatever I want. No, you need to be mindful actually of what is happening. So as an example of context sensitive, not necessarily Parrhesia, but I gave you the examples of in Slovak politics and Slovak art scene. So again, it's being context sensitive, so that truth is not just somewhere out there that you can't relate to, but it's something that actually should resonate with you. And secondly, it's ethical conditions, and this is where, again, Chris elaborates on Foucault a little bit. So a Parrhesiast, a person who speaks the truth, needs to be compassionate at the end of the day. And this is where Chris and John differ. So as you remember, for John, it's about, again, setting up, staging these provocations, whether in art or in philosophy and so on. But for Chris, it's, you know, being context sensitive and actually being compassionate. And compassionate is about being able to relate to people around you and be susceptible to the difficulties that they go through. Again, it's one thing, like for example, for me, who only kind of half belongs in academia, to go and just sizzle academics for whatever they do, but it's another thing is actually to listen and ask them, like, you know, but what kind of life you are having, right? So, you know, so are you happy with this life? What we can do about it together, right? So this is more like Chris's line of argumentation. And he argues that if, you know, this epistemological and ethical self-understanding is missing, in short, if you're not susceptible to the plights and difficulties of the world you are in, you're quite likely to backslide or to surrender to three types of bad Parrhesia. So bad Parrhesia is the opposite of this, you know, kind of effective truth speaking. It's not really the courage of truth, it's something else. And Chris breaks it down quite nicely. So the first one is reckless Parrhesia. Is again, it's when you kind of think that you have the courage to speak, but at the same time you are not compassionate, you are not mindful about the situation in people's lives and so on. So it's reckless, it's hot-headed. You're not actually attuned with your environment. Second one, which is very, very common in post-truth politics and media, it's deceit. I'm sure you all know Carlson Tucker, right? That's Carlson Tucker. Tucker Carlson, yeah. And deceitful is that when you kind of pretend that you speak the truth, to the authorities and so on. That's what Tucker is often doing. He's kind of, exposing the flaws here and there. But on the other hand, they are actually siding with their own group of people with their own preferences. So, for example, this Tucker Carlson, I keep confusing. Tucker Carlson, white, rich, Christian, right? Very typical combination. And whenever he is trying to advocate against, for example, the hypocrisy in American politics, you can see that whenever it comes to challenging the foundations of his own view, Christian view, so rather than Islamic, for example, or Buddhist, white as opposed to black, rich as opposed to poor, he's got nothing to say. Right? So if we go back to the very pillars of Foucault's Parrhesia, you can see what it's missing. What's missing is criticism. And there's criticism of the culture and there's criticism of the self. So what is missing here is self-criticism and self-understanding, and that's why it's deceitful, it's manipulative, and it's very popular. Right? And third one is third kind of bad Parrhesia is injustice, and we see it very commonly, for example, in the context of kind of a left and right politics where people plunge into tribalism. Like, I am a communist, and I'm a socialist, I'm a Republican, and so on, and people just create these little tribes. Similarly, in Australia it's very common, and there's like these, gay communities of people who, again, I have many gay and lesbian friends, but there's also a tendency to kind of shelter or block yourself away and put yourself on the pedestal and show that you actually have some special role to play without actually seeing that we're all entwined, we're all subjected to power plays out there, and that we actually all need to try to work together. So it's unjust in the sense that you actually don't know what other people are experiencing, and you just create your little bubble of friends or like-minded people and think that everyone else is wrong. So again, this is bad kind of Parrhesia. Right, and very shortly, Schwartz offers us 4 alternatives to these bad types of Parrhesia. Quite interesting in my opinion. So the first one is fearless silence. Right? So fearless silence, again, is when you see the world around you being utterly polarized. People believe that I believe in this and I believe in that, and everyone is just using these shields and swords and fight with one another, and you just go, I'm gonna, all right, but I'm not gonna engage with this. And it takes some courage. So for example, the American election is taking place like today or something like that. So fearless silence is not participating in the election. So who do you vote for? Trump or Harris? And I'm like, none. I'm not voting for either. So it's kind of a fearless silence, if you like. So it's when you kind of know what is happening, but you are disengaged. You are like, I don't want to deal with this, It's all full of lies. And Chris is posing a very, important question, and it's why this form of fearless Parrhesia is quite problematic. But what if people in politics want us to be silent, want us to disengage, right? So that's a fair question, because in fact, to change something, probably you need to be active and proactive. So second example is fearless listening. And I hope that there's some instances of fearless listening in this class, is when you are actually attentive to what people say, when you are discerning and you're actually taking things on board, and it modifies and changes your beliefs, slowly and gradually you're learning to shape your own beliefs, opinions, and your own truths about life. All in all, Chris argues for this irenic form of Parrhesia. He takes this word from Pythagoras' Irenic school in philosophy. Again, as I pointed out, Chris is a very lovely spiritual person, and in contrast to Carvalho, who is also a very lovely person, he is willing to engage with the mainstream. He is looking for situations, environments where some harmony and cohesion is possible. He's still quite a provocative person. He's still willing to engage in heated debate, but he still has some faith in the mainstream. He still has some faith that in any environment we can still create some climate, if you like, some atmosphere where Parrhesia becomes possible. Right, and finally, which is my favorite example in Chris, he advocates for fearless curiosity. As he puts it, fearless curiosity is the conscious choice to ask sincere, tough, and even potentially embarrassing questions, right? Please, again, remember that Parrhesia, we consider Parrhesia in the context of power plays. So, are you in a position to ask sincere, honest, tough, complex, difficult, and even potentially embarrassing questions to those people in power? Or you're afraid? And to encourage you, I'm going to play for you this little snippet from one of the best investigative documentaries I've seen last couple of years, called Life in Taliban's Afghanistan. The journalist is Isabel Young. She's from England. So what took place in Afghanistan in 2022. Americans ran away and Taliban took over the whole country, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Islamic countries and women's rights, but what happened in Afghanistan is totally brutal in terms of totally squashing any rights of women in the country. And there she is, female journalist in Afghanistan, among militant, brutal, aggressive authorities, asking questions about rights of women and having the courage. I really hope that the volume will work.
So the last time that I saw you, you told us about a divorce case. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that case and what happened and what you think should happen?
طلاق موضوع خمو پیساره وکړه د موږ پیساره نه ورسته و جان مرافعه وغوښته وسلوړ مرافعه ته موږ نه لوړه چې کومه محکمه ده په محکمه کې.
And what was it that you decided here at this court?
او پیساره داسې و چې مدعی دعوه د طلاق کړی و د وهلو کړی و هم د وایلو شاهدان و نه د طلاق شاهدان و هیڅ شی نه. مستیم مدعی ته مدعی علیه ته قسم راجع کوم و قسم وکړ چې ما وایل نه دی کړی. موضوع خلاصه کړل.
So because the husband has sworn that he didn't do it, that counts for more than the fact that this woman is saying that she was repeatedly beaten. She has scans of, broken bones, broken nose, broken arms.
مات نو لاس پکای نو مات بخی ات شیم نو مات کومدا چې خځه کړی و هغه نشواهدی لرل.
Where do you think that women who are in abusive relationships should go for help?
نو حق ظلم خو نشته دی. اخو د خلکو ادعا وی دي چې چیرې خځه او میړه په حقوق سره وچالي نو ټول شای خوندې او محفوظ دي.
Do you think that it can ever be justified for a man to beat his wife?
دی وایل دومره وایل چې شنه نشي اثر دی وایل په کار نه چې چیرې شنه شي قاضي ته ولاړ شي عریضه وکړه قاضي دې پښتنه کو چې ول شنه.
Should women be allowed to do your job and preside over cases and to determine what justice is?
زاوات په خزل بوجوي زاوات د خزل فور نشته چې قاضي شي.
You've seen enough, right? So again, this is fearless curiosity, right? She's literally risking her life, surrounded by brutal men with Kalashnikov guns and asking all those questions. So again, these are the people who are Parrhesiastic, who should, and you should be moved, I hope, and encouraged by that kind of activities. And again, now think about little, petty concerns in our life that, we're afraid to bring up in the company of people we should trust the most. And you can see the difference and spiritual evolution of this person as well, right? Which one is it? This one? Yep. Okay. How much time do I have, Clement? 15 minutes? All right. Cool. All right, so so far we have considered Parrhesia in the context of Western neoliberal societies where freedom of speech is like a social right we take for granted, even though still there are some complications. The main one of which is that, because again, we live in the context of post-truth politics, where the majority of people, the majority of population watch and believe in mainstream news and whatever they are told out there, and therefore any fearless speech is actually barely possible and perceptible. So just to give you kind of a counterexample of how Parrhesia can work in an autocratic dictatorship, namely in the context of Iran. We're going to consider Majid Heidari's piece in a second. But again, in autocratic states where people are actually afraid for their lives, for speaking truth, things are very real. One of the potential contributors to this volume was from St. Petersburg, Russia, and in the end he just dropped out. He just said, listen, I've got things to offer, but if my authorities at university and people are dobbing, reporting on one another out there at the moment, if they see this publication in an Australian journal, not only I risk losing my job, but also it's imprisonment and all these things. So things are really real in those societies. All right, Majid Heidari, another very good friend of mine and colleague. We've worked on many things together. Very beautiful person as well. And again, typically, beautiful, honest people are full of courage. So he writes in the context of Iran. And I think most of you know, I hope that women at least know the situation in Iran. You have to, wear the whole ninja setup. You have little rights and so on, and it's a religious dictatorship. So you have the politics and the religion kind of melted, cobbled together in one bundle of kind of aggressive dictatorship. So in this work, Majid distinguishes between two types of political Parrhesia, and this piece is another piece of journalistic philosophy. So one case is where politicians, put together, document and appeal to those in power, and another situation is where normal citizens like ourselves create particular events to expose and to voice their frustration with whatever is happening in that country right now. So the first two examples are Letter of the 90 and the other one, Cup of Poison. I really love the title. And again, they were signed by members of the parliament, people who were in opposition, and they were just demanding simple things. They were like, look, you're so bloody rich, you have so much power, but look what is happening on streets. People are poverty-stricken, drugs everywhere, and so on and so on. How about we try to change something, right? And the way it was twisted right away that, in fact, you're advocating for, bourgeois capitalist values, for, liberties, and so on. So, you are traitors, right? So you don't believe in Allah, you don't believe in our state, you don't believe in a supreme leader who is a descendant of God, and therefore you'll be penalized. And every single one of them was penalized. Some were exiled, some were killed, mutilated, and all these horrible things. Right. Other examples, and I really love that one, 1977, just before the Islamic Revolution, 10 Nights of Goethe. Like for all of you who love Goethe and literature, again, all these names are beautiful, and you can see the spirit of Iranian people, and Iranian people are descendants of who? What culture they descend from? Persia. So it's an ancient civilization. Zarathustra, if you like Nietzsche, was a Persian prophet and thinker. So, it's ancient peoples. You can't break their spirit, right? You can't break their spirit. This society is 2,500, 3,000 years old. They've seen it all, right? So 10 Nights of Goethe, artists and activists gathered together for 10 days and sat in the rain in sight of thousands of cultural enthusiasts, and they demanded simple things: freedom of expression and recognition of artistic labor. That artists also work. To create paintings, to create films, to create music is a work. You don't need to have this official manual work or intellectual work. Artistic labor is labor. It's difficult. It requires skills, and so on and so on. They had the courage, but every single person who created or co-created this event was persecuted. They were subject to exile, imprisonment, death, bullying, and so on. And again, this is a recurrent motif in all of these countries. And again, it's Parrhesiastic. People take courage to challenge the status quo. They go out of their way to do risky, amazing, unique events that move and touch everyone up until now, and they're punished by the authorities. So, in conclusion of Majid's piece, he makes two interesting remarks. So the first one is that, on one hand, all these high priests and politicians, they actually encourage fierce, bold, courageous criticisms of oppositional values, specifically US, capitalism, and so on, right? So it's on one hand, but on the other hand, they are totally blind to the miseries that they bring about in their own country. So they're not susceptible towards criticism towards themselves. So if we go back to Chris Schwartz piece that I considered just prior to that, you see all these forms of bad Parrhesia playing out, right? So it's manipulation, it's unjust, and so on and so on. And this is beautiful. In the conclusion, Majid says that the effectiveness of Parrhesia is when those in power instinctively deny the allegations and position themselves as victims, like victims of capitalism, for example. And we just saw a similar pattern in the context of Afghanistan, when she's like, hold on, but this woman, she had her bones broken and so on, but he's like, but there's no evidence, so, instinctively denying the allegations. But but how about this and that? No, it's all good. So again, think about all these patterns in your day-to-day lives. If you come across face people that you want to be honest with, and they just back out and they deny all these allegations, again, it means that, again, you are being actually Parrhesiastic, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can get that message across, right, to those people, because they're thick, they have immunity to those things, and yet when you do that, you can inspire people around you. Right, and as I said, when it comes to the descendants of Persian civilization, they will never give up, even though they have been penalized, punished, Even though Majid, while writing this piece, was on the verge of being sacked from the university, he still wrote it, he submitted it, and it's going to get published, and he's waiting for another opportunity for a new revolution. So again, that's the spirit, that's the ancient spirit. Right, we'll skip this one. It's a piece by Joshua Hall on shamanism, but I think I have kind of pushed you far enough, and maybe we'll do something else rather than talk about taking psychedelics and seeing spirits and communicating with ghosts, right? So maybe it's for another opportunity. In conclusion, I will just briefly touch on two pieces that deal with visual mediums and Parrhesia within the context of visual media culture. So first we have a piece by Michel Antoine Xines. He is a Canadian thinker, roughly my age, and frankly I think that he is the most gifted aesthetician of my generation. He's very, very imaginative, very clever, and you judge for yourself. So in this piece he is looking at the Parrhesiastic medium of war photography, right? So he can contrast war photography with the state propaganda. So state propaganda gives you a certain fabrication of truth, particularly when it comes to the context of war. They give you some form of, fantastical spin and interpretation, a certain angle. But for Michel, when it comes to war photography and war journalism, what is at stake is actually not interpretation, but something much deeper, something much more philosophical. And again, I think that this piece of aesthetic investigation is absolutely excellent, absolutely mind-blowing. So he's questioning whether war photography, so you imagine, you read through a journalistic article and there's a piece of a demolished house or, any of those, or someone's hand being severed, all these brutal things. So he's is war photography transparent? In other words, what does the war photography actually show, right? What is the truth of war photography? And he's if it was really transparent, we would look through it as if we were looking through the window or through water, for example. But to him, it's really not the case, and he juxtaposes it with painting, for example, right? So one thing is to take a photograph, so you have all these mechanical operations taking place, and you're taking a snapshot, and when you take that snapshot or a shot, your beliefs, your intentions are, do not really play out, unlike in a painting. When you do a painting, it depends on your moods, on what you actually want to paint and so on. So, they're different things. And he's well, it seems that in comparison with a painting, photography or war photography is transparent. But, as he's going to argue, it's not the case. So he's asking the question, is war photography exclusively or even primarily on an epistemic practice? So epistemic deals with the truth, right? So does it communicate to us a particular type of truth governed, again, by certain standards within the media worlds, established by all of these associations, which demand that you do not manipulate, that you do not twist facts. Because if you start manipulating and twisting facts, this is where you engage in a form of propaganda, essentially. Right. And astoundingly, Michel argues that no, it's not epistemic. He says that while war photographers chronicle evidence of horrific events, the actual activity is about an effort to convince us of some position, namely that war is morally repugnant or bad or horrible, and spur us into action, namely by opposing war in question. So to be more specific, war photography's primary aims are perlocutionary. It's a very technical word. It means that it's intended to have a particular effect on us. So it's about an effect, right? So, and then he's like, but isn't it similar to propaganda? You know, propaganda is trying to make an effect as well. So he says that war photography mirrors propaganda, whose aims are likewise perlocutionary. But where propaganda aims to persuade us without regard for the truth, war photography aims to persuade us with the truth. And persuade us about what? That war is horrible. Like, you can make all these pictures and interpretations, but deep inside, when you engage with anything that has to do with war anywhere in any time, you should be moved, and you should be moved by disgust, aversion, horror, and all these aesthetic feelings that we need to learn to experience to be fully present in this world. And so to kind of clarify the shift from epistemic to perlocutionary practice, and this is where his analytic acumen comes on stage, he distinguishes between the object of a war photograph and the subject. So the object of the war photograph is like all these bodies in the picture on the surface portraying a particular event, right? But the subject of a war photograph is the horror, right? It's the horror. War as such is an abstract idea. You can't communicate what is war like what is justice, you know? What is justice? What is love? Can you capture love or justice on camera? No. We can catch some instances, right? Same goes for war. It's just an abstract notion. So the very subject of war photography for him is just the horror that we need to learn to engage with. And here's an example for you that Michel is using in his paper. Very famous photograph by Nick Wood, Napalm Girl, 1972, Vietnam War, right? So again, what we see here is a napalm explosion and a Vietnamese girl in total agony being burned by toxic fire, and an American soldier rolling a cigarette on the right. So for for Michel Xines, works of war photography are transparent with respect to their object, but not their subject. So their subject is the utmost nihilistic, it's the utmost negation, it's death. And its meaning ought to elicit terror, aversion, and this terror and aversion, again, it's one thing just to watch on television or on your media, you know, the statistics of what happened in Gaza yesterday or or Ukraine, and just go like, whatever, I've heard it before, you know, kind of the problem of evil, you know, old evil, it doesn't really move us anymore. But it's another thing to have this aesthetic sensibility, perceptiveness, attunements with actual things that are going on out there. And if we have it, if we're aesthetically literate, if you like, you will feel aversion. You know, you feel motivated that, you know, whatever side you take, the subject of war is against life, essentially, right? And so in conclusion, in Michel's eyes, the war photographer is a true Parrhesiast who risks life, limb, and reputation to show us the consequences of what are often otherwise popular foreign policy interventions in distant lands. So they want to communicate the carnage and misery to which they or she stands witness. Right. So let me conclude, move towards conclusion. I also had a few slides about Stephanie Bauman's piece on Parrhesia in documentary, but I don't have time. Please just watch Laura Poitras's Citizen 4. Have you seen Citizen 4? So if you want to learn about Parrhesia documentary, watch this film. It's about Ed Snowden, a regular guy with a well-paid job, young man, 27 years old, who was hired by the government, and he exposed the global conspiracy of American government, Australian government, British government, Canadian government, in cooperation with global tech corporations, stealing our data and information about us without us knowing that. He exposed this scheme and was severely punished. Obviously, was called a spy, and so on and so on. Right. Another missing piece is carceral archipelago. It's about police abolition. Last year, we had a little gig on Australian ABC with Adam Elliott Cooper from University of London and Gio Maher from University of Pennsylvania. So it's about on police abolition. It's about like what are the origins of the police, why the police are so present in our society, why the body of police is expanding, and correlations between the police, criminalization of people, and again, lack of community and society. Like, there are no people who would step and help one another out. Instead, we have police, banks, and blah, 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 blah. So check it out. So in conclusion, final point that I wanted to make, as many of my projects, but this is the one that kind of more or less lives up to my ambitions, is this idea of seniors. I don't believe that we live in the age like the age of Foucault and all the thinkers before him, when you have this one author writing great books and inspiring whole generations of people. I think we live in a totally different age where single-authored scholarship, however brilliant it is totally consumed by the neoliberal capitalist apparatus, and what is at stake is to create collective endeavors like this one, dealing with a particular topic, where people actually talk with one another, help one another writing papers, but there's again a sense of culture, communal collective intelligence within a given scene, and that's something that I'm trying to promote pretty much in all the work that I do. Right, and so to wrap this project up, our authors have considered Parrhesia in the context of post-truth politics, religious autocracy, racial capitalism, and they all contribute, they all have a hand in our warring world. The world is at war with itself, ecologically, geopolitically, and so on. I think we're all on the verge of, again, horrible disasters, and they become more and more tangible. Again, I'm not really a pessimistic person, but we need to see things for what they are. On the more positive side of things, what I want to emphasize that every single author in this volume offers you various kinds of kinship to cultivate, to embrace. So in the context of John Carvalho, you remember, it was friendship, right? So kinship is like when you have something in common with people and you try to cultivate it, because without being together, nothing is possible. It's just these atomized units of people trying to do something for themselves or for their families, while everything is just falling apart around us. And while all these executive brokers, like in your politics or Russian politics or British or Australian or American politics, actually take advantage of us being so atomized. So every single author argues to cultivate various forms of kinship, friendship in the context of Carvalho, ironic Parrhesia in the context of Schwartz. So it's when you have this compassion and interest in the interlocutor despite the differences that you have with one another. In the context of Majid Heidari, it's collective Parrhesia. Every single example from Heidari, it's multiple people coming together, creating events, not by themselves, but they realize that you can't fight those powers on your own. You need to come together. Still, they were all obviously punished, but at least, again, this is an example or the precedent of collective Parrhesia. We didn't talk about Joshua Hall. In Joshua Hall, it is kinship with the spiritual world. Again, if you believe only in the scientific view of the world, you totally ostracize all the non-Western indigenous traditions, whether it's Australian, Mexican, Brazilian, and so on. And in those traditions, they actually live together with spirits of their ancestors. So it's either they're mad or we're very narrow-minded. It's up to you to decide. So in Joshua Hall, kinship with the spiritual world. In the context of Michel, it's the, a form of kinship with the victims of war. So it's not saying that, who is right, in this war. No, it's kinship with all the war victims who suffer, right? So that's what truly matters. Yeah, so that's about it. And my conclusion is this. To break free from oppressive social realities we are all subjected to. If I'm wrong, please try to test me. Here, all minimal Parrhesiastic efforts may eventually lead to significant changes. Again, if I started doing many projects just on my own, but in the end, this volume is 9 books. Martin and I publishing another book, it's 25 authors. Another book coming out next year, it's 33. So again, when people come together, interesting things happen. Thanks for coming. So, the readers or the listeners today are unanimously, so all the authors in this volume encourage you to stage context-sensitive, provocative conversations and events. Otherwise, we will all drown in this post-truth mediocrity, in this vomit news, essentially. And all of that is resting on spiritual capacities, again, which is also spiritual, ethical, whatever you prefer, that have to be cultivated. It's mutual duty and care. If you don't really care for yourself or people around you, nothing is possible. If you see no difference between self-legislated, self-serving rules and duties towards higher aims, nothing is possible. And to conclude with Foucault, the target of this new Parrhesia is a matter of changing one's style of life, one's relation to others, and one's relation to oneself. So if I were to sum it up, it's about changing your life to the bone. So thanks for coming. Cheers.
Thank you. Well, now we have still maybe some 15 minutes for Q&As. Máte otázky, podněty, reakce. So, if there's nothing I could ask, maybe.
Sure.
Well, yeah. I was just thinking that if these kinship relations, after all, are not limited to basically a certain type of refuge taken, side taken, which loses the ability to create any type of social, let's say, agreement or joint approach which is often needed in times when the whole countries, whole blocks are in, let's say, war or have some dominant stance in certain issues like Israel, Palestine nowadays, and so on. Mm-hmm. That is why basically, and maybe the obverse of this is that nowadays we have the simulacras of any kind of Parrhesiastic activities. Mm-hmm. Because one could say that, let's say, those, let's call them conspirational theorists, they often act like precisely this type of people, mm-hmm. right? They consider themselves to be really in condition of being bold and courageous, suffering from...
Sure, yeah.
How to make this difference? I'm still thinking, and I've always thought that, okay, to add all to these Parrhesia basics, one should also add certain type of theory, at least to put some effort into.
Sure.
Because
there's a lot of theory out there.
Join even very different types of kinship.
Sure.
And dissolve those who probably should not be supported.
Oh, yeah, I get it. Look, I can say many things, but just to keep it really simple, I think when you're surrounded by people who understand that searches for truth or truthfulness are actually come about or butt up in the process, things change. So it's one thing to have pre-established, abstract paradigms that you want to use here in this context and interpret it in this way. Another thing is when you have really open-minded people, like in this volume, who are trying to create something fresh, something new together. Because again, I pointed out that courage is about pushing the limits of what you are capable of, intellectually, artistically, spiritually, and so on. And it's when you are around people, or people who at least look up to you, or it's when you're in that kind of environment, new things that don't have to be theories, but new insights, new pathways become possible. I think that's a way towards, something fresher than what we have right now. Because, again, the media landscape, the mainstream media landscape in any society is hijacked by God knows who towards God knows what purpose, and it's all meaningless. And unfortunately, the majority of population in each country, whether it's Slovakia, whether it's Australia, it doesn't really matter, just jump on this bandwagon and are not willing to sacrifice anything in their lives towards something else. And that's the main thing.
Yeah, I would certainly join to the point that there's a lack of philosophically informed. That would be maybe, let's say, a kind of theory-bonded journalism.
Yeah, there's no education. There's no education.
In that case, one would maybe find out that it's not only about, it's not mainly about sacrificing anything, because most of people have not as much to sacrifice than to sacrifice their complacency with theory missing in any sort of approaches to things. Because what I think is nowadays one of the main issues is that most people think that, and believe it, really honestly believe it, that the idea they have about anything, if they are informed in basic, average way, that information is enough to make you the right picture.
Sure. Well, it's
and
not.
That's, that the things, the way how you work out, put these information together, make out certain type of meaning and approach based on that it's fully your thing, and that everyone is basically capable of doing this right, and with reflection and transparency.
Sure.
Which is exactly not the truth, because we are like loaded with ideas, prejudices which go through us without even noticing that they are there.
It's the flexibility of consciousness. Look, for Foucault, Parrhesia is an educational problem, and I try to frame it from the very beginning as an educational problem. In the absence of creative and critical education at schools, with the kind of philosophical, career-oriented education we have at universities, we're going nowhere, right? So that's very, very simple. If we were to offer our kids, from the age of 8, 9, 10, a kind of critical education that is required today, rather than this very scientifically minded kind of a boring, no child wants to go to school, pretty much, no child is motivated. If we were to offer something new rather than these old British, Soviet models or whatever, things would be different. But I don't think that's on a plate. And that's why, again, I'm very much siding with Carvalho that we don't have much we don't have much time to begin with if you have a look at ecological statistics, what is happening in the world. But we don't have much time in the sense like, my life is limited. How many years do I have? I don't believe in an old age. I've had, 2 near-death experiences in the last 4 years. I don't have much time. So what I really have is this conversation, or a conversation with my students, or I don't know, anyone who is willing to talk to me. That's all I have. And that's all I can count on. That's it, to me at least. Anyone? Here's the opportunity to practice some English in the courageous way. No? Any questions? Has any of these ideas, have any of these ideas moved you, or no?
Thank you very much.
All right.
Inspiring.
Thanks.
Thanks for the talk.
Thanks for coming.